I'll just like to point out, I'm no longer Deputy Director after 18 years. I've stood down. We founded the centre 18 years ago with myself and Professor Mary Sheen, and Mary retired about 5 years ago, and maybe 18 years it's soon for me, but I'm just now just a mere tenured professor, so it's better. It's great. Um, I'll go. Um, also, trying to think just what this session was about. Often, as people do, sometimes you think, well, I'm going to New Zealand, so you'll get some slides about what the issue is in New Zealand. And for this session, I was trying to think really what was the outcome for it. So what I wanted to do was give a bit of an overview of sort of our roadside drug testing results. But more importantly, I suppose, to pose some more questions as well for the next few days. When I was studying, I look back at some things I wrote a few years ago when we were starting to look at drug driving and getting up legislation and policy in Queensland and actually even prior to that in Australia. And so some of the points were that we, our early research prior to the testing programs and prior to sort of any other major investigations was looking at we were probably had a drug driving population of around about 3.1% of drivers at the time, and that was compared to around about 1% for drink driving. And people were going, oh, no, that's madness. You're never going to get anybody. And I'm looking at some friends who've experienced similar sorts of issues. And we found out that there's quite a lot of people out there. The other thing I sort of said very early in the piece was that we do need, and it was brought up this morning with Rita, about we do need to combine drug and alcohol researchers and road safety researchers. Road safety researchers without knowledge of the drugs field making decisions in this area will create problems. We do need, while it's a road safety issue, and also that's how we explored the area in Australia. It was a road safety issue. We do need to have that knowledge and experience about drug use, and I make that point that we do need to understand who are these people driving these vehicles. Also, a few years ago, I made the point about two sorts of drivers. Basically, there were two sorts when we did our very, very early work with those, and I use these terms in inverted commas. There were those recreational drug users who were occasional users who used on weekends or at a party. And basically, it was suggested that they had a driving problem. And there was also a substantial group of dependent users, and those people had a drug use problem. And there were two different ways of targeting these sorts of people. And when I look at some of the data later on that I'll present, you'll see that this starts to come out. Okay, from about 2004, Australia's jurisdictions across Australia have been progressively implementing random or rather roadside drug testing using saliva tests. There's consistency between jurisdictions. There's obviously different idiosyncrasies, but there's a relative consistency across jurisdictions. The legislation is generally, again, although legislation is different, is based on a per se legislation with a detected concentration. And we could talk more about what that concentration is and the philosophy behind it in later sessions. But the concentration in many ways is determined by our roadside screening implement. Currently, legislations are looking at in Queensland, I'll use as the example, cannabis, methamphetamine, speed, ecstasy are our targeted drugs, with consultation amongst many jurisdictions at the moment about looking at where we may expand those. One of the things you have to consider is what's always sitting in the background is the cost of these programs, particularly the cost of the roadside screening implements. That's where one of the sort of the logistical issues actually come into it. And this has led also to, in the introduction of a lot of programs around various jurisdictions, of primarily more generally targeted programs as opposed to our massive random roadside breath testing programs. Detection rates generally across jurisdictions in Australia, the roadside detection rates for drug driving is much higher than drink driving. And also Australia and around the world, there's been very limited evaluations of roadside drug testing programs. Our current program, I'm having troubles when I brought this across from the Mac. We're using a Securitech drug white twin swipe, which happens first. Then people go to a second instrument, and it is either a COSART, or in Queensland we've just started using the new Dragar equipment. Are you still, have you shifted to Dragar in Victoria yet? still on that one. And I'll make a point in a second about what happens when we shifted equipment. I'll sort of flag it. We've picked up more cannabis. Oh, there it is. Look at that. From PC to Mac, something's interesting happens there. The general interception test takes about 5 minutes. If you fail the first test, you then go through to a second set of procedures, which take again up to about 30 minutes. One of the issues all the time in the background of this legislation was about how long the road stop is. And we've created a bit of a rod for our own back because we're so efficient at our drink driving, where people are quite happy to be pulled up, but as long as it takes 3 or 4 seconds or less than a minute. So this was always something in the background, how long is the roadside intercept going to take? And the other issue is that we're looking at in terms of deterrence, particularly, is the time taken between the roadside test and final court appearance. Because swiftness in terms of deterrence theory is one of those important key elements. And as people are still processing through court, we're seeing a long time between roadside testing, the initial test, and final court appearance. Okay, this is just some data, and I'll run through this. This is up to around about September 2014. I also put a little caveat here. There's some data up to about 2012 as well, because some of it's based on police regions. In 2012, 2013, we decided to reorganise all our police regions for about the 15th time. And so consequently it makes data collection very difficult and trying to rejig all the data again. But it's more the themes that I'm interested in and what we found. Basically, we're looking at around about since December 2007. Queensland's much smaller than Victoria's in terms of its testing. It started later. This data is looking around about over 100,000 tests with around about 4,000 positives. We're also looking at a state, for those people who don't know, of around about 4.5 million people. So what does the data say? What really, if we start to look at this data, is, where's the pointer? This one? Oh yeah, there it is. Except, can anyone, there, oh, it's a pretty dead pointer. Is what's happened over the years, our detection rate's getting much higher and much higher and higher and higher and higher. Our drink driving rate is around about 1 in 100 still. Whereas our roadside drug detection is round about now up to about 1 in 11. So that in many ways is a result of targeting. Targeting is a result of the cost of it, and also in the original early stages about keeping quality control of the whole process, and that is a major issue in terms of when you start looking at these roadside interventions, to keep control amongst the police officers in terms of quality control. How are the tests done properly? Is the equipment properly looked after, maintained, etc.? But it's a trend that runs across most jurisdictions, is that detection rates increase and increase and increase. And I think, Martin, you're going to present some of your data from Victoria too, are you not? Okay. But it is a trend that we're getting. Our detections increase all the time. What does this mean for you people? It means that we do get variations amongst the regions. You do see different levels of detections amongst regions. And again, whilst we tend to, and I think it looks at sort of like what are drinking cultures and drug cultures, whilst we tend to have some way a generic drinking culture, you tend to have more variation in drug cultures across geographic regions. So you tend to see this variance between different regions. The Gold Coast, which people will have more knowledge of, has a lot more party drugs. Our mining regions have a lot more crystal meth, have a lot more, methamphetamine, because it's used amongst a mining workforce. Our North Queensland has much higher detections on cannabis because it's always the hippie area of the state, always has been. I went to university up there, hence I decided to pursue a career in substance use. But you notice this, whereas our drink driving convictions are pretty well the same across the state. I just sort of put that in. That's a map of Queensland. We're talking about Queensland in Australia, and that was sort of a picture of it. But what I did put on the next one was, if we just simply look at our major two drugs that we catch most of the times, methamphetamine and THC, we see that in the southern area of the state, methamphetamine to THC was about 2 to 1. Whereas as you go north, in far north Queensland, you get THC as compared to meth at about 4 to 1. So you do see rather large variations across regional areas, and I think that's something to keep considering. I'll go through age. Yeah, who are we getting when we look at all the data set over the years? 25 to 39-year-olds or 25 to 49-year-olds. In the beginning, it was originally suggested, we're going to get these young 19, 20, 22-year-old drug users. No, we're not. We're getting much older drug users. And I'm going to allude what our drug users, what are our people looking like. As a researcher, these are people who are much more entrenched in their drug career pattern. They're not necessarily a recreational young user who are going out and partying on a Saturday night. Just gender type. When we get to our females, the females tend to use more meth. Males tend to still use a lot of meth, but we do have differences with cannabis. So our female population tends to be more of a much heavier meth population. Crystal methamphetamine, that is, sorry. Now, this is perhaps the slide that's really interesting. It took incredibly difficult to get the data. We went through and we looked at our positives and we dug up criminal histories, because nothing's linked, nothing's terribly hard to link anything. In reality, on your grant application you say you can link everything, but when you go to try and do it, it takes you years to get data, doesn't it, Jane? What we found, 68% of our positive drivers had previous offence convictions for drug-related. These are court convictions for drug-related, for driving offences where people have to appear in court, so that's dangerous driving, undue care and attention, property offences, stealing, theft. So who are we getting? We're getting people who actually have previous police offences. Over half, 2/3, 68%, 7 out of 10 of our offenders are in touch with the police agencies already. So it's starting to go back to my first question, what are our drink drivers looking like? And there were two sorts of cohorts, a lot of them with drug offences. In terms of motor vehicles, our heavy vehicles are overrepresented. Typically heavy vehicles operators come up with methamphetamine, some sort of stimulants, although you do get them with cannabis as well. I still remember interviewing one truck driver. He says it's lonely and boredom driving trucks sometimes, and I think better driving stoned, as you do. So you do see bits of cannabis, you do see cannabis in them, but still mostly stimulants in terms of heavy vehicles. 3 minutes. I'll go to this one. Look, I had trouble with this last night again. What we have here is we shifted in the last this year. We shifted roadside screening implements from the COSART device to the new Dragar device. And what happened is it's much more sensitive on picking up cannabis, THC. So our cannabis numbers have actually risen now, whereas historically we were picking up more methamphetamine and amphetamine as compared to THC. But in the last 12 months, our THC positives now have increased, and that's that issue of the roadside device actually is your default screening cutoff. I just want to make some closing comments, and this is for people to move on. You sometimes have to be careful about comparing alcohol, as alcohol is more random. Australia has a very extensive random breath testing program, whereas random drug testing tends to be targeted. We are looking at what we call an aggravated drink driving offence, where now we're starting to look at those drink drivers with alcohol, and we're now starting to test them. We're going to look at and testing them for drugs, because historically, once they blow positive for drink driving, the charge is established, so we actually don't go and move for drugs. And we're also trying to look at those drink drivers who are coming in under the limit. So they're blowing a positive, but they're still within the required limit, so we want to look at them. Roadside drug testing is more sensitive to local trends and patterns, so you'll get that. It does provide it's very good actually in terms of drug trends patterning. It does give you that immediate feedback rather than waiting months and months for your household surveys or your regional surveys, some places years. THC users tend to be younger. Older males and females tend to be methamphetamine users. Detection rates originally around 2%. Our detection rate is increasing. These are the issues for me. We still really don't know qualitatively what we're starting to look at, what our offenders look like. Who are we actually picking up? What we do have now is we just have the data in terms of statistic, male, age, etc. but we don't understand the culture of use, which is about the culture of driving. And I think that's where we do need to do much more ethnographic work in this if we are going to move the field. You know, so how do our drug drivers differ to drug users? Whilst they are the same people, are they different sorts of behaviours? Or in some groups, are they the same behaviour? A dependent drug user will always be drugged when they drive. But a recreational drug user probably has more of a driving behaviour. So how you target those people are different. How our program's working with deterrence. Drink driving in our country has a huge general deterrent and specific deterrent strategy. I'm getting the buzz there. But I actually think with the targeting of our drug driving programs at the moment, we've lost our general deterrent strategy to the general population. And once you start to look at this more dependent user, specific deterrence in terms of drug driving becomes very difficult because you're trying to manage a drug problem there as well. What can people take away from other places? Whilst Australia does have actually quite extensive roadside drug testing programs, it was built on the back of extensive drink driving programs. So there's a long history. There's a community acceptance of it. There's a policy historical background of it. So it fitted in very easily. The community accepted it. Even in terms of what were our cut-offs, it was easily accepted. And it was also seen very easily, and it was predicated again in terms of a driving problem. I think this is my last slide. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I see this. I've gone to, over the years and years, I've seen many, many people talking about roadside, or rather drug driving, but still they've got no programs on the roadside. So look, Australia made a deliberate decision to act and go with the best available technology at the time. Consequently, you know, we've been on the roadside now for 10 years. But we made that decision to go with the best technology at the time. Also, we went from the known to the unknown. We started with what we knew. And again, Rita pointed out this morning, there are things we know. There's a lot of things we don't know, but we did actually move with things we knew. We started off with 2 drugs, then we've started off targeting 3 drugs. Prescription medications. Yes, prescription medications are an issue, but they're a social and political and legislative minefield. If we were going to wait to target those sorts of things before we put a program in, we still won't have a program. So we've got to look at what can we do now. And also, and I put this about threshold limits, whenever you really look at threshold limits throughout history, they tend to go lower and lower and lower every year. Every 5 years there's a new threshold for everything, you know. We understand the drugs and the substances and behaviours and impairment better. And the classic is alcohol, in a way. You know, it was 08, then it moved to 05, then it moved to 00. So I think when you look at these thresholds, you've got to, you know, people get tied up at it a lot. And that's the end. Sorry.
No, thank you.
What was it? 75, 15 seconds over or something.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.